we are never truly lost. Well, okay, sure, maybe we get turned around for a few days in the woods, where life just feels like it's getting the best of us, and everything's going wrong. And I'm Mike Martin, and I've stood right where you're standing, lost, beaten down, like nothing's ever gonna change. And that's why I built this camp. And that's why I'm inviting you to join me and all the members of this wild community. Because you know what, friend? It does get better. So come along with me into the wild and let me show you this awesome, unique skill set that lays within inside of you. With help from the land, we're going to unlock the steward that's inside each and every one of us that will lead the way out of the darkness and into healing. Here at the Camp of Healing on Project Mindfully Outdoors. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode number 2 of the Campfire Conversations. Here as a part of Project Mindfully Outdoors. And before we jump into today's episode, I've been fielding emails all week long about what exactly is going on and what sparked the change. Well, honestly, I think it comes down to just the willingness to expand and adapt to, well, really the cool and new technologies and things that are available at our fingertips. And it's been something that I've been kind of toying around with, is figuring out how I can incorporate a new avenue and give me something new to work on and I guess rejuvenate myself with something cool and, fun to play around and see what happens with. Because after all, this is really just, it's been an ongoing evolution and really kind of tinkering along the way. Like one of those learn as you go type moments or situations. And that's what this is. And the reason that I felt like the Campfire Conversations was the perfect opportunity to do such a thing and made this move is because I feel like when you just listen to the conversation, you kind of miss out on a few of the important nuances, the body language, the different mannerisms and things that really define and really add to the conversation. So if you're listening to this on Spotify or some of the other directories that offer video at this point in time, you can enjoy and you can feel like you're actually a part of the conversation instead of just having two people kind of talk at you. And I hope it adds to things. I hope it really helps you to connect with and then interpret and, even adapt some of these ideas and subjects that we discuss, that we talk about, throughout these conversations. And for episode number 2, setting it up and getting ready for it, I thought about the fact that I really like to provide a variety. I like to look at things from a different angle and get new input, as well as being in this to learn new things for myself as well as share with you. And that's where Heather Ivany really comes in, because the work that she does is something that before getting ready for the conversation, I wasn't very familiar with and really didn't know a whole lot. So getting the opportunity to get ready and then talk to Heather and explore the idea of the Akashic Records and how that can be used to help us kind of sort through a situation that we're in. or get unstuck, if you will. And I feel like, the way that Heather not only puts it out there and explains it, but the way that she makes it intangible for everyday life is something that, we all can chew on and do what we're going to do with. But I feel like it's going to help us. It can become that one little thing each day when you sit down and you meditate and you start to tap into these different things, asking questions. I feel like it gives you a direction. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the conversation with Heather, and I hope you enjoy. And I'll talk to you on the flip side. Well, spring is here, and I'm sure you're wondering how you can take your adventure up to the next level, right? I mean, we're always looking for that sort of new boost. So you want to know a secret? I've been turning to my good friends at FreshCap to take advantage of all the amazing natural boosts that come from mushrooms. That's right. And the results, well, they speak for themselves. Backed by a 100% rock-solid customer happiness guarantee. I'm positive you're going to love the results as well. FreshCap has been with us right from the start of this journey. They were the first one to sign on and to back me on this mission. And throughout that time, I've really come to trust and rely on their amazing products. So give yourself a little bit of added self-care this spring by adding the ultimate mushroom to your self-care regimen and take your adventure to the next level. Just visit freshcap.com or hit the link in the show notes. And while you're there, use promo code ProjectMindfullyOutdoors10 to save 10% on your order today. That's freshcap.com and promo code ProjectMindfullyOutdoors10. All right, Heather. So, getting ready for this conversation, I came across a lot of things that I'm not so familiar with, but I think they really speak and tie in to, the idea of a healing journey. And that basically being the biggest one that jumped out at me was the Akashic Records and that whole healing idea around that.
Yeah, so the Akashic Records are, it's a Sanskrit word, which means space or spirit. And in science, we call this the quantum field. Some people relate to it as consciousness. It's the overarching umbrella is called the Akasha. And then within that, there's something called the Akashic Records. So every organism that has a consciousness, or even like a business project, for example, that serves a purpose beyond itself, would also have an Akashic record. So it's kind of like your fingerprint or your DNA blueprint, if you will, in the cosmic realm. And each individual soul has sort of a GPS signal that they send out. It's like their own beacon. And so you can tune the radio frequency, if you will, into someone's specific frequency and get information on the continuum of that person's soul. So you can go into past lives. You can go into, if you're open to it, you can go into parallel universes and other dimensions. And you can go into this present lifetime and just access information and support it in your present here and now.
See, I love that because the reason it jumped out at me was the idea that I've really learned to adapt in this chapter of my life is that, basically everything that you end up facing is something that nature laid out for you. It's prescribed specifically for you. And that really reinforces it.
Yeah, so you can even go into, like, you could go into the Akashic Records of an entire cedar grove tree, and you can get the information on the cedar trees as a whole unit, as a whole ecosystem. And you can also just go and sit with one particular tree, and you can get information on what that tree has experienced in its lifetime, what it's seen, what it's witnessed, what it's lived through, what it's survived. It's fascinating.
It's very fascinating. I'm curious as to, how you get that process rolling. I know it's not a matter of just going out into the tree stand, looking at a tree, staring at it and being like, hey, I want to know what you've seen and what you've experienced. I'm sure you've got to tap in to on some level with that tree and build that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how I teach people to access and work with the Akashic records is through the senses. And so we call this clairabilities. And the clairability that most people are familiar with is clairvoyant. And so, what we've kind of done in our society is that we view clairvoyant as the access and the gateway into other dimensions. And we either have this ability or we don't have this ability. And part of the work that I do is just to demystify that a little bit and take the veils off and just allow people the opportunity to be exposed to the fact that everyone has a way of experiencing life through the senses, and each individual will have one or two sense that is stronger than the others. So the type of clairabilities that we have are clairvoyant, which I mentioned. So that's your inner seeing, the ability. Some people see images and auras. Some people see a lot in their dream space. Some people will almost see it more with like the physical eye, in the sense that when they walk through life, they take in a lot of information that the person next to them doesn't take in that much information. That's also sort of a form of clairvoyance. Like they see a lot more than the average person. You pass by someone on the street and you can go and sit with your buddy at a coffee shop, and they'll be able to tell you what that person was wearing head to toe, and you barely noticed if it was male or female. That's sort of a form of clairvoyant. And then the other clairabilities would be clairsentient, which is the ability to feel and sense through your body. So tingling, shivers, hairs on the back of your neck. Hunters work a lot with this when they're navigating in the woods. They're really feeling into their senses and what they're picking up through the signals in their environment. We also have claircognizance, which is like your inner knowing. So when someone says, hey, do you want to jump in the car and go here on the weekend? And you have an instant yes or no, that's a form of claircognizance. And it's faster than your thought. It comes in really quick, really sharp. And if we're not used to working with it, then we might miss it. It kind of comes in, and it comes in so fast and quick that it's almost like a blink and we miss it. And then our thought comes in afterwards, and will try and either move us in that direction or sway us against it. And then there's audio and taste and smell. So when I'm working with individuals and teaching them how to access the Akashic records, first I'll do a session with them to determine which of their clairabilities is most prominent. And then that's how I'm going to coach them and mentor them on how to access the records. If they're claircognizance, we're going to listen to those inner whispers and those voices internally. That is your thought voice, but they're guidance and beacon systems on how to receive information from the Akashic realm.
That's really interesting because, I know personally for a long time in life, I kind of walked around with the blinders on and really didn't pay much attention to things. And then I got to a stage in life where I started becoming more aware. I opened my eyes, tuned into like meditation, and kind of got in touch with myself. And that's where like a lot of those senses really started to expand. And since then, I'm, I guess, almost diving down wormholes that come up. And this being one of them in particular, as a prime example, is kind of like something catches your eye that you would have missed beforehand, and taking that time to explore it and learn how to understand it, I guess would be the easiest way to start to build a practice to expand and start to tap into that.
Yeah, and I love the example that you just gave, because you're tapping into this really like side conversation about meditation. In that, when we meditate, oftentimes there's very few people that are meditating for the the experience of enlightenment. Most people are meditating because they want to experience a little bit more stability and peace and calm in their day. But one of the beautiful ripple effects of meditation, and one of the reasons why I've grown to love it so much, is because when I meditate consistently, the gap time between the situation that's in front of me and the reaction that I have to it and how I respond to it, it starts to widen, it starts to lengthen. And it gives me that moment to choose which way I want to respond. And that's exactly what you're describing, is that you're noticing that you're getting hits, downloads, pings, however, whatever word you want to put in there. And perhaps the old version of you wouldn't have noticed it, but the new version of you has this gap time that comes from the practice of meditation that allows you to notice, like, that's coming from somewhere outside of my physical surroundings. And I'm going to explore that and get curious and see if there's more unfolding that can happen if I go down that road a little bit.
See, I love the way that you put that because I think back to when my meditation practice first started, and it was basically slowing everything down long enough to put the crosshairs on something to pull the trigger. And then, as life progressed and I started exploring things and was introduced to the formal idea of meditation, I laughed it off and kind of thought it was stupid. And then, you know, resorted back to going out and practicing some shooting and realizing that I was meditating by going through that practice of shooting. And from there, it really became kind of like this ripple effect where those waves and those different experiences started to grow. And I think that's kind of probably what brought this conversation together, was on some level of me not knowing that this was out there. It was kind of time to explore and discover.
Yeah, and it brings you back into the connectivity that is life. I mean, this is anyone who's a nature lover. There's a felt sensation of connectivity that you can't get when you're interrupted all the time with the transmissions and stuff that we have in our concrete jungles. And that connectivity is personally, I believe, a big reason why we have so many epidemics with mental health right now, is because people can't figure out how to be connected. And that experience that you're sharing of being in nature and being surrounded with so many ways to be invited into connection, it's amazing.
I was just having this conversation the other day, and even thinking back to my own footsteps, and with the fact that, people have that issue with connection, and it brings out all these different unhealthy responses or mental health crises. And I think it boils down to that simple fact that we just lose sight of the ability to self soothe.
Hmm. Yeah, great point. I love that. And why do you think that is? Why have we lost the tool or the skill set to be able to self-soothe?
I think it kind of stems from one of two, maybe even both reasons combined, is the fact that, growing up, you're not really taught those skills. You're not really shown how to put those practices into work within a situation. And then number two, we just get so caught up in the hustle and bustle of the concrete jungle that, we overlook it. We forget about it.
Yeah, and when you're describing the point of when we're kids and we kind of lose that. I mean, even if we look at like our childhoods nowadays compared to even 30 or 40 years ago, like we were kind of let loose, right? Our parents would just sort of open the door and we just ran wild with our friends and did all kinds of different things, and then we came back when we were hungry. It was how parenting used to take place. And modern did you lose me there, Mike?
Yeah, I did for a second. You're back now. And you're absolutely right. I mean, parenting, is the face of it, is definitely changed. It was kind of more laxed at the, in our childhood, and then we realized, hey, there's so many things out there that we had to confront, and we started to kind of rein things in as we became adults, and we started to have kids. And I guess somewhere along that line, maybe for a good percentage of that, we forgot, hey, we should teach these healthier, practices as well, and not let the kids go out there and discover the different things that we did.
Yeah, and so what is lost benignly, like I don't think it's intentional, but what we lose in that process is our ability to use our senses to be able to navigate our next steps. So when you're out there with your friends and you're hanging out and you're trying to make the decision, like, should we go play at the mud pond or not play at the mud pond? You get a feeling about whether or not that's a good idea. And then you act on that feeling, or maybe your friends are going to peer pressure you and override it. But you still have this moment where you're actually sensing and feeling whether or not your decisions are good decisions. Whereas unfortunately, what's happening is that so much of our authority is just being handed over to our caregivers that it's dimming the ability for us to be able to access these clairsenses. But the good news is that the moment we choose to be more in touch, to be more connected, they're right there. And so there's certain people that will come into my training of teaching people how to read the Akashic Records. Some people are strong energy healers and they've been doing this for a long time. And some people are just like, I actually don't even know what I'm signing up for. I just know that I want to do this, and I'm hoping that you can support me on this journey. And we just get to go on this really fun ride together of figuring out which clairsenses are accessible to them. And then in a very short amount of time, we're just curating and amplifying them.
No, I love that because I know for a bulk of probably the majority of people out there, especially myself included, we stumble into things, and it's scary and it's hard to really envision yourself there. But when you get to that point where you put your feet on the ground, you realize that these are kind of like the steps and this is the journey that you were intended to be on the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And being able to trust those breadcrumbs as they come in and being able to follow them and see where they go. It takes a lot of inner resilience and faith in oneself to go against the grain, if you will, because there's such a strong amount of energy when you have the masses of people operating in a certain way. It creates a frequency that's very magnetic. So anytime we're trying to take our own frequency and rise above it or do something alternative, it requires a certain amount of momentum to be able to override that pull of the masses. And anyone that does it, honestly, I think it's absolutely friggin' miraculous when that happens and when you get to see people do that.
See, and you mentioned that important aspect, that trusting yourself part, which is what I've really grown to love about the mindful aspect of being a sportsman or sportswoman, is when you stop and you think that I go out into the wilderness, I do these different things. I've got to trust myself to do it. But, when I'm in the concrete jungle or the day to day world, I've lost sight of that. So if I bring what I do in the wilderness, the principle of being able to trust my own abilities, into the daily world, I feel like it's helped me at least to be able to be more present, more aware, and connect to different people and different situations that normally I would have ran away from.
So then what is the thing that's allowed you to be able to trust yourself? How did that start to curate within you?
It's funny because the more I share that story and the more I think about it, it was just the overall freeness and lack of people around me when I was in the, out in the wild or out in the wilderness hunting, fishing, whatever, that given that time in my life, having just had everything fall apart around me and, no confidence or anything else, I got the opportunity to look back and realize, hey, I did that while I was out there. If I take that little bit of momentum from the field and I step it into my everyday life, I can go a little bit forward. I can start to trust myself. And then it kind of snowballed from there. And it gets to a point where, regardless of the environment, you're able to just, without really thinking about it, you're able to have that trust, that awareness. And I feel like that unlocks so much potential to go forward in your life and either rebuild or continue to go and progress.
It's fascinating. I love that you shared at the beginning that the experience of freedom, it almost like it gives you the space to be able to explore the parameters of your self-trust. That's a concept that I've never actually considered before, is actually having the freedom to just flutter your wings a bit and try things on and make mistakes and fail and get clarity and all the things that oftentimes when we're being observed, or when we only have an hour at a time, or we're in the confines of a small space, we don't have that freedom access to be able to develop self-trust. That's a neat concept to think on. And then to take that one step further, it's like, even in that moment of freedom where you're, and correct me if I'm wrong, but where you're developing your self-trust, consciously or subconsciously, you're tapping into the field that's around you, right? The Star Wars force, if you will. And it's guiding you on how to make your next step, which comes back as the response of trusting yourself. But in fact, there's other forces that are at play there. And perhaps when we shift that into our daily life, when we're in the concrete jungle, it's harder to access those forces because nature is not right there beside us.
No, you said it beautifully. I mean, this coming from a guy that, social anxiety is like a major factor and can be crippling and debilitating. And especially at that stage in my life where the idea of being not only observed but having somebody around me, it was, just it was terrible. It was like basically a phobia. And then to get out, and I remember those first days too. It was a matter of throwing the boat in the back of the truck and going down to launch the boat and go out and spend a day fishing. At that stage in my life, it was, on a day-to-day life, I couldn't even decide what to get for dinner because, I was so full of self-doubt. But when
Mm.
I launched my boat that day, it was kind of like launching myself on this different trajectory altogether, where I realized, yeah, I had that hurdle. However, I can control the way that I see it. And that became, I guess, the pathway of practice and really wrapping my hand around the understanding and believing that idea.
Well, what a tremendous testimonial your podcast is then. I mean, to go from that point of social anxiety to being debilitated to the point where you had to get out of Dodge in order to feel like yourself, to now be hosting podcasts. That's phenomenal.
It's funny because I do these campfire sessions to work on my social anxiety.
Awesome. I love it. There's another point here that you're highlighting that is ringing a bell for me too, is that so recently I hosted a retreat in this beautiful retreat center called Harmar. It was down in Mexico. And what stood out the most in that 10-day retreat that I was a part of was every single person. So not only was the land this very high vibrational space that we were hanging out on, and then everything, there's no electricity, so we were just back in the times of like using kerosene lanterns in our cabanas. And then the space that we practiced our yoga in, it was also exposed to nature. But then on top of that, every single person that worked there, like, genuinely wanted the best for us. Meaning, the housekeepers weren't just people cleaning our homes. They, when I came home at the end of the day, it felt like my mom had been there. The way that they tenderly folded my clothes and did these super nice touches that weren't necessary, but just really made me feel loved. And then their healing practitioners and all the different people that work there genuinely wanted the highest and greatest good for every single person that was attending. And this is something that I have only ever experienced in nature. When you're saying you're getting your boat and you're loading it up and you're getting out into the water, there's this thing that nature has that hasn't been like destroyed by humanity. A lot of our spirituality and our religion has kind of been tainted because it's taken on this sort of Santa Claus approach of if you're good, you get good things, and if you're bad, you don't get bad things, or you're going to get bad things. And so we're warped into thinking that sometimes the universe is collaborating for us and sometimes the universe is working against us. But nature has had this way of just remaining neutral because it's unbiased. And I don't know, maybe religion never got a chance to destroy it. But when you're in nature, there's just this knowing, even if the weather conditions are shit, and I get that sometimes, but there's this force of energy that we're working with that's trying to help us get to where we're trying to get, whether it's just putting the boat in the water or actually catching the fish and then being able to build a campfire and eat it later. Everything is working to support the journey that we're on. And that doesn't transpire when we come back into society, unfortunately. So when you're describing the social anxiety and the feeling like someone might be not working to support you, it does create that doubt. It does create that resistance. And this is why trust in self is first and foremost before we can trust in others.
No, I love that too, because that really sums it up well. Is I feel like, at least from my personal journey, when I hit that stage in my life where I had to shift and adapt and really center on the idea of I'm going to build this self trust, was because, getting back to the beginning of it, I don't think I was ever really taught that concept growing up. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, it was a matter of masking it with whatever anybody else told me. And then you had that, like, ground shifting type moment, and realizing I can either, in one hand, say the entire force of the world is working against me, or in the other hand, whether or not that's true, I can start to determine what it is that my path ends up looking like. I can start to take the reins and take control of the story, and I can start to push myself forward. And regardless of, where we're at in life, or whatever the situation, the scenarios are you're standing in, it may be harder, it may be easier, it doesn't matter. It boils down to that simple decision. And that's something that I've really come to not only understand, but very deeply embrace, that regardless of what forces are at play, it's that simple decision that you have control over.
Hmm. I love it. So what's amplified most for you since you've made that decision to just work through it rather than accept it?
I would have to say it's probably that, not only that or that ability to trust myself and really rely on myself, it's kind of understanding that I've taken that mask away. I don't have to bounce the ball off the wall in order to get whatever value somebody says that I have. Through that trust and that effort, all that work, it's put forth this value that I've earned, and that nobody can take away from me. So regardless of how the ball bounces back, my feet are much more stable on the ground because of all that work and all that time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How empowering is that, right?
It's a lot more empowering to say and believe now than it was a few years back when that train first started rolling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very cool. Well done.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, I think we mentioned something in there that, I believe a lot of the principles that you work with people on is the idea of really life is what you make of it, and that you had that control to dictate the story, and finding the easiest, most relevant way for you is really probably what the key to this whole journey ends up becoming.
Yeah, and the oftentimes what is the most easeful path is actually the thing that feels most natural and authentic and like ourself. And unfortunately, I think a lot of us, when we are trying to find our purpose or align with our authenticity, we have this impression that it's something completely different than how we're showing up each day. It's either far reaching and we can't attain it, or it's supposed to show up in the form of like fireworks and unicorns and rays of sunshine, when in fact it's like this very, very natural gift, skill set, tool, whatever word you want to put in there, that we've actually been living beside all our life. We just never realized that it was like a superpower that we had because we assumed everyone else was doing it too.
I feel like a lot of the time it's like we're trying to fight the current. You
Yeah.
know, there's that magnetic pole that's kind of leading us along the way, but out of instinct, because it looks like everybody else is doing it, we want to swim the opposite way. So we want to swim against the current. And it brings up a lot of struggles. It makes life a lot more challenging. And I don't know that all the time it ends up getting you exactly where you want to go.
Yeah, because you're trying to live someone else's dharma,
Right.
right? Rather than your own. Like it's like, oh, if I this looks shinier, so if I move in this direction, that's going to be my golden ticket. When in fact, you're essentially like, there's an expression that's like, it's better to live your own dharma, your own purpose imperfectly, than to live someone else's dharma perfectly, your parents' dharma, your society's dharma, your imagination's dharma. It's better to live your own dharma imperfectly than to live someone else's dharma perfectly. And I love that expression.
And I think it makes me kind of think back to the beginning of this conversation where we were talking about being able to find essentially the records of our soul and kind of like what leads us in a direction. Is it almost doesn't even go to that level if you just take the time to tune into yourself. Kind of like, you know, the idea of a tree, how it grows and it branches out, it naturally does that. The same thing holds true for us. You know, if you sit down, you build that meditation practice, all the different branches naturally come out.
Yeah, and the difference between the tree and ourselves is that the tree doesn't get a choice, and we do.
Right.
And so, because we have choice, we can choose not to grow and stay small. And that choice is valid. There's no judgment there. And we can also choose to venture into the unknown the way that a tree does with its branches every spring, just moving into the space that it didn't occupy before. That's the unknown realm. And it goes in that direction. Yeah, nature is like one of the best teachers that I've found, and the human body. Like watching how the human body operates and works, how the heart just has this tremendous capacity and intelligence to know the exact amount of output it's needed and rest that's needed so that it can beat every moment of every day until our last breath. It's impressive, and we don't have to go far to find the inner teacher.
You know, nature is honestly, by far, as I've definitely come to explore and learn, the greatest medicine out there, regardless of what's ailing you. Whether you're caught up in your own stories that are kind of weighing you down and holding you back, you can go sit in the woods and just watch the way that the animals interact, the way that the wind blows through the trees, and so on and so forth. And there's going to be some kind of inspiration there. There's going to be some direction that leads you toward not only the answer to the questions that you're asking yourself, but it also can help propel you forward into that unknown. And when I think about the unknown, I think back to probably one of the most powerful things that have ever been mentioned to me through a therapy session is this concept that you sometimes you just don't need to know. You need to just put your feet on the ground and walk forward. And it gets back to that idea that we all have that magnetic pull that leads us to where we're supposed to go, and we just relinquish the control and the effort and stop swimming up current and just let it take us to, you know, ultimately the best version of ourselves to really complete the story that we're here to live.
Yeah. And relating that back to the Akashic Records. So when I do an Akashic Record reading with someone, I work with the present moment. So the only time that I personally in a reading will go into a past life is if there's some sort of a wisdom piece from that past life that clicks the puzzle piece in the present moment and helps that person comprehend what's taking place in their life. And what's interesting is that when we start to dive into past lives, people really want to know the story. They want to know the why. They want to know the how of what was taking place in that lifetime. And it comes through so often in the records from the frequencies that I'm working with that that is not needed. That information is not necessary in order to move forward. All that's needed is this one thread of wisdom to bring it from the past and embody it in your present moment. It's already in the cells of your DNA. You're simply just accessing it and bringing it into present moment. And we can do the same with the future. We can go into future versions of ourselves that have already actualized the dreams and the visions that we have in this present moment. The reason why we have the dreams that we have in the present moment is because there's a version of us in the future that is already living from the actualization of that dream. And so we can go into the records and we can access the future version of ourselves and ask questions. What was your first step that you did that led you to where you are 5 years from now, 2 years from now? Oh, okay, zip it back into present moment. Now you're ready to roll. Now you're ready to go with it. And it's very cool to think of it in this way, that your dreams and your visions are future versions of yourselves coming back into present moment to say, hey, wake up, because we need to start, because this is where we end up. So let's get started.
See, that's the other concept that I've really developed and explored a lot is that idea of storytelling, not only to other people, but also internally. You know, being able to tell yourself these stories and explore the ideas, I think brings that wisdom out and helps you to propel yourself toward, you know, what your future self would look back and say, hey, it's time to get moving and go in this direction.
Yeah, like and don't be afraid to ask questions. That oftentimes people are very nervous um, to respond to the hits and the downloads and the pings that they get. So most often what happens, and I also think that this comes from our history of religion and spirituality, is that just do what you're told. So when we get a hit, when we get a download, and it's like, okay, quit your job and move to so and so, that download, we just say, oh my God, I'm just so grateful that consciousness is actually speaking to me. I'm just going to submissively do whatever it says and not ask any questions. And this is part of what I work with in the Akashic Records, is that you are in a co-creative relationship with consciousness. It is an equal relationship. You cannot exist without consciousness, and consciousness cannot exist without you. So you get to ask questions. Really? This is the download that's coming through? Okay, great. Who are the people that are supposed to support me on this journey so that I don't burn out? How am I getting my financial backing in order to start this business that I have this great idea about? Who am I asking to partner with? What sort of things am I offloading to create space in my life in order for this to come through? These are the types of questions that we get to ask back to the universe when we get these hits on, like, here's your next step. And so I see so many people that get so excited to have a download that that's where they stop, and they don't progress beyond that into the relationship quality of, okay, sounds great, but do you think maybe we could do this in 3 months' time when my kids are back in school and I have a little bit more time on my plate? Things like that, being able to ping back and forth and create compromise. with the universe if we need to. These are things that people don't oftentimes consider when they're exploring their connection with it.
I can completely understand that because it is kind of a lot of put the blinders on and just go with, where you're told to be and do what you're told to do. That idea of questioning kind of falls into that scary notion of the unknown, the unexplored, because what happens if you don't like the answer that you get? you
Yeah,
know, what if what if there is no room for negotiation?
yeah,
What if it's kind of like, hey, this magnet is pulling me in this direction and I got to go now, but I'm not prepared. So being able to sit and develop that self confidence that we've covered and talked about so much, that ability to trust yourself becomes key.
yeah. And the question asking is for clarity, not to feed the doubt or try and soften the doubt. Like the doubt gets to be there. The people that move into self-trust, it's not this like linear path of like, oh, once I was super doubtful and now I have no doubt. The reality is the doubt is a part of you. It's always going to be there. But the degree to which you let it rule your life and make your choices starts to diminish when you start acting more from spirit rather than from doubt, acting more from love rather than from ego. So the question asking is to get clear on what exactly are we doing here? How is this happening? Not so much to be like, I need another proof of you actually working for me. Please send me another sign. It's a different frequency. Can you feel that?
But absolutely, I can feel that. It's
Yeah.
kind of like the idea of putting yourself in a van along with all these different feelings and emotions with wisdom in the passenger seat and kind of saying, hey, I'm going to drive now. I'm going to listen to the wisdom being on the GPS, and that's the only voice that's really allowed to dictate anything on the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. So your ego goes in the back seat and plays with Legos, and your like sovereign kingly self, your wisdom piece, is riding shotgun, and that's who you're listening to.
Exactly. So, as we kind of start to run this down, and I love that metaphor because I got one question I love to ask people. If I throw you and all the wisdom experiences, along with all those doubt filled emotions in a truck, and send you down the road, what's going to lead the GPS? What direction are you going to head?
Oh, I'm going to head in the direction that is most curious about what I don't know and go that way.
And when you get there, what's the wisdom that you're going to be able to share with each and every one of us?
Oh, I gotcha.
I had to set that up differently.
Um, be curious about the unknown because it holds potential that's beyond your wildest imagination.
I love it. And then you've got to let everybody know how they can get in touch with you, what you've got going on, and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So if people just want to experience me with a little bit more depth and no strings attached, feel free to visit my website. It's just my name, heatherivany.com. And on my homepage there, I have a button that says Join the Spiritual Reset. And that's a 7-day journey that you go on through an email experience with me. And it's just introducing you to the different facets and tools that I use. I have some free meditations and yoga nidras in there and different ways to kind of move from the distraction of the periphery in towards your midline. And if you want to explore anything else from there, it's all available on my website. And then the one social media handle that I use is Instagram. And it's just my name, Heather underscore, and my last name, Ivany, Ivany. And I go on there once a month and do some free meditations on there for people.
Well, Heather, this has definitely been a very informative and new kind of conversation. So I appreciate it. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mike. I was thinking about halfway through our conversation, I was like, I actually don't know that you and I would have like stopped and talked to each other if we met each other on the street. So I just love that this whole conversation, this whole meeting was just like a pleasant surprise because you're a very fascinating human being, and it's been a real pleasure and an honor to spend some time in space with you.
Well, thank you. It's definitely been great. I mean, I've learned some new things, and I think that's the beauty of these podcasts and the way it brings people together that normally would never end up interacting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, we'll have to get together again sometime soon and continue down this rabbit hole.
Sounds good. Take care for now.
You too. All right. That is it. That is all. And that is the end. We have reached the end of yet another edition of our Campfire Conversations. And, I think that as we go forward, I'm really beginning to adapt, and it puts me in a situation I have to challenge myself. And, like I've said before, the work and everything that's incorporated with the project, I've kind of found different aspects to be able to hold my feet to the fire and challenge myself and push myself forward. This may very well be what proves out to be that next step. Perhaps, in meditation one day, trying to figure out how to go forward or how to get beyond the unstuck feeling that, I've experienced. Maybe this is kind of like that Akashic thing pointing out to me and saying it's time to take that next step in that new evolution. So, like I emphasize so much on the Project Mindfully Outdoors podcast, it's all about that one little thing, that one little challenge that is able to help you go forward and spark some kind of new life into a situation that will help you to put some traction to the wheels, and that way you're not just spinning the mud. And until next time, my friends, get out there in the wild. That's where the stillness and the adventure lies. See ya.